Is there nothing you want? And I've just been saying it like a mantra, the Rosary. I hadn't asked for anything. It really took me by surprise, shocked me really. And that was really when I first began praying for my heart's desire. And that was really the beginning of my journey. Before Our Lady, I had no experience of it at all. And since then, it's become the foundation of my life.
Welcome to the Something About Mary's podcast. Today's guest is Clark Strand. And I, for one, am super excited about him. And I wanted to share with everyone the story of how Clark Strand in his book impacted me. I was going on a road trip from Northern California to Southern California with my dear friend Linda. And I opened up my Audible app and there was no books in it. It had been like cleared of all books. And I was like, that's so crazy, as if they'd all been archived. And there was only one book in my library, and it was The Way of the Rose. And I was like, this book, where did I find this book? I was on my way to a retreat the first time I saw Clark Strand's book, and there was a woman next to me on a train reading the book. And I talked to her because of the rose, and she said it had nothing to do with Mary. But we decided to start listening to it on our road trip from here, the San Francisco Bay Area, to Los Angeles, which is a 6-hour drive, give or take. I have an electric car, so I have to stop and plug in. And as we were listening to the book, each step along the way, it would say something in the book, and then we would pass it on a sign. We would pass, like, it would say, for example, one part of it said something like, oh, well, the Madonna. And then it would say, you're on Madonna Highway. And it shook us. And it kept happening enough that we stopped to buy rosary beads at the mission in San Luis Obispo along the road trip. So about 4 hours in to the road trip, because it kept happening and it kept happening. And the book finished as we pulled in to Venice Beach, California, 1 block away from where the book ended at the Rose Cafe in Venice Beach, California. So then we went to one of his prayer circles and we loved it, but they still are doing the Hail Marys.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
So, and then I got some more books about praying with beads and started to study the prayer of beads and where it began. And so I started to pray to the beads. And then one day, while I was praying to the beads, it said, you need to start praying and doing this as a writing practice. And that's what really birthed the sacred petitions of the rose, where we write and pray every morning. And we go through the rosary stating Miriam's name, right? And those divine syllables of Ma, Re, and
That's pretty wild. And I do enjoy when I come to the circle. There is something so magical about chanting. And I used to think people were crazy when they chant. I'd be like, I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what's going on. But it's the tone, it's getting in the vibration, it's hearing other people. And and I'm tone deaf, by the way, so it's got to be better for people who really can hear. But all of a sudden, when you kind of come into the same tone with each other, it's like a vibration, and it's like a very euphoric feeling. At least that's what I experienced. And after doing the chanting, I felt like so connected and so spot on. Exactly what was going on just from that chanting really changed a lot.
Today in the prayer circle this morning, while I was doing the chanting of Miriam's name, I felt a message from her so strong that said, like, from now on, I want you to write first and chant second.
Mm-hmm.
And I said it out loud. And then somebody at prayer circle said that they got the exact same message while we were chanting.
Wow. I think there is something to it when we are chanting and we are hitting the same frequency, right? That almost like higher consciousness, when we see things or we getting messages or all that, well, it's in your head, you're bringing it on. It isn't here in front of you. But I think it's possible that when we do get to the same frequency, that we may be sharing something.
Well, and it's kind of that idea of frequency, even if like at the most scientific level, that if you have a wave that's like this, and we're all in that wave of Mariam, of I am love, love I am, right?
Hmm.
We're all in that wave. That when those two waves that are the same hit each other, they actually just increase, right?
Yeah.
So I was very inspired by Clark Strand and by his book, and the praying of the beads has brought me closer to Mary and closer to the divine feminine. And that's why it's so fun to get to share these books with other people, because I we know how much these learnings, these teachings changed our lives, changed our
Yeah.
wellness, changed our healing, changed our purpose,
Yeah.
and have empowered us as women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be a book that we've read over and over. And like every time you open some of these books, you get something else out of it that you didn't get the first time around, the second time around. And I think they're such tools. It's just incredible.
Well, I'm super
Yeah.
glad that we are bringing these authors out to our audience and to the greater audience of women who are feeling the call to gain back their power and to turn all of the love and devotion they give to the world back on themselves. So let's get to the podcast and our wonderful guest, Clark Strand.
I am the Lord, I am the Virgin and the whole.
And we are the Magdalene Rising Collective. Welcome to Something About Mary's, where we are flipping the script on history, or should we say, her story.
That's right, Carrie. We're here to uncover the stories they didn't want you to know. You know, the ones buried under centuries of patriarchal doctrine, hidden gospels, and a whole lot of repressed femininity.
And we're not just talking about Mary Magdalene either. We're digging into the sacred, the scandalous, and the downright badass Marys who have been overshadowed, rewritten, and forgotten entirely. So grab your chalice
Or your coffee mug, and join us as we reimagine the sacred feminine, one cheeky, irreverent conversation at a time.
because here is the thing. This isn't your grandma's Bible study. This is a journey into truth and love.
Welcome to Something About Mary's, uncovering her story they didn't want you to know.
And my name has been covered up with shame since ages. I've been locked up in these chains.
We're back with the Magdalene Rising Collective podcast. There's something about Mary, and we are here with the incredible Clark Strand. We are really enjoying this conversation. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I was having a thought. I listened to your book, a while ago, and then I was re-listening to it before this interview. And I was thinking about your story about the boy drawer.
Oh,
And I really kind of feel like the church has been the boy drawer and divinity was in there. And the boys didn't even really think about that it was all theirs. Right?
yeah.
Like how you didn't really think about that it was all ours, and that we as women really didn't even think about that we weren't allowed access to it.
Right.
And it just
Well,
really made me, I really thought about it. I thought that was such a really telling way of explaining.
yeah. Well, to contextualize that a little bit, in the chapter called The Boy Drawer from The Way of the Rose, I talk about the fact that I grew up in Forest City, Arkansas, where, my mother and father split up when I was an infant, and I went to live with my mother and my grandmother. So I was raised there in the late 1950s and early 60s. And the woman who was like my nanny who took care of me, Josephine, she had also raised my uncle, and she had this drawer in the kitchen she called the boy drawer, because it was where she kept my uncle's toys when he was a boy, where she kept my toys, right? And so I used to go straight for the boy drawer whenever I would go to my grandmother's when I lived there. When I was very young, I would just go there in the morning and take out toys and play with them, and Josephine would put them back at the end of the day. So I grew up never once asking myself if there was a girl drawer. When I asked my sisters and my mother and my aunt and my cousins, female cousins, if there was a boy drawer later on, years later, right? Uh, my my mother and my aunt would say, "No, why do you ask?" And my sisters and my female cousins would just go, "Of course there was no girl drawer. What are you talking about?" Yeah, there was no girl drawer. Of course not, right? So that became in my reflections on growing up, and on a particular dream I had where I went to in a dream to the boy drawer and found a rosary inside of it. This became a way for me of thinking about patriarchal religion. That it's filled with all kinds of toys designed especially for men, right? And that they're taught how to play with them, and there's all kind of privilege associated with it that is virtually invisible to the men who occupy positions of power within the structure, right? Unless some woman comes and wants to take it away or challenge it, then it becomes noticeable that the women don't have it, but they just don't feel that women don't have a right to it, right? So it never occurs to them that they occupy a gender specific power structure, right?
Right.
They're taught not to notice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said that. You said that like you were taught to like let those visions go. And we just
Oh,
had
yeah.
a circle where there were women who were from, I think it was the Mormon religion, that they said they were actually taught how to release their visions, to release their intuition, and to let it go as part of their raising up through that religion,
Very zen.
which is so to me. Oh my goodness. Like I get so what I find so much is I'm like, these are women practices stolen and then turned into like power structure to keep
Yeah.
us small. And it gets me good.
Well, that's what happened with the rosary. It began as a folk practice, a devotional practice in the Middle Ages, which was basically built around this idea of creating a garland of prayer, of roses, right, for Our Lady out of devotion to her. And people would go typically to a statue of Our Lady, oftentimes a Black Madonna, and they would say a Hail Mary, and oftentimes bow down for each one. They maybe do 50 at a time. They would often kiss the statue, touch it, right? And they would make a prayer. They would for some grace or healing or petition or deliverance from danger. And when that prayer was answered, they would come back and say thank you, right? This was basically where the rosary began. So this was a folk tradition that had very little to do with it had very little theological content, like in terms of like organized religion. In the miracle stories from this era, and most of the literature about the Virgin Mary from the Middle Ages are miracle stories. Jesus and God rarely appear as characters. People go straight to Our Lady. They ask for a miracle. She gives it. And maybe they say, and God in his grace and his son, you know, gave their approval or something like that. But it's almost cosmetic, right? They just aren't really characters.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So we're talking about a practice that was later co-opted to use, in the anti-abortion movement, right? Or used to promote quote family values,
Yeah.
used to combat feminism, right? The rosary has been used in modern times by the church to suppress women,
Right.
even though it was originally a practice, treasured by women and that honored the feminine and
Yeah.
practiced mostly by women and through the early part of the 20th century.
Well, I think I mean, I know that you mentioned too about how psychics have used the rosary to connect. And what I found was really interesting reading your book is how much I was raised by a five element acupuncturist.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so, and I was raised off the land. I'm very lucky. I had a lot of interesting knowings as a kid because of that situation. Um, but I find it so interesting that these mysteries also could be like the seasons, right? Like the letting go season, the wintering season, the birthing season, the fruiting season, right? They match these witchcraft ideas that were really just following the earth cycles. Yeah, and
Yeah, very much so. The mysteries have three parts. There are the mysteries of birth, the mysteries of death, and the mysteries of resurrection or rebirth, right? So the 15 mysteries of the Rosary, which are basically just, for those who may not be familiar with it, or just retell the story of Mary and Jesus from beginning to end. But there really is no end because it just forms a circle and starts right over again. So
yeah,
it starts with the annunciation of the angel Gabriel to Mary. It goes through Jesus's childhood. Then it skips to the 24-hour horror story of his arrest and crucifixion. And then it goes to the glorious mysteries, which are about his resurrection, about the ascension into heaven, and ultimately the assumption and coronation of Mary as Queen of Heaven and Earth. Really interesting thing. That is not a linear storyline. Okay. It's not a biblical storyline. Like most of the episodes and the mysteries are actually from the Bible, but the last two are not. What happened was this: the priests in the Middle Ages wanted the rosary to end with the Last Judgment. But guess what? European and Mediterranean peoples who were still deeply rooted in pagan culture and in earth-based mystery traditions that basically followed the sort of the cycle of the seasons, right? That you
yeah.
mentioned, birth, growth, degeneration, decay, and then rebirth in spring. These people didn't want anything to do with it. So they weren't organized, they weren't literate, right? They didn't send representatives or anything like that. They just said, hell no, we're
Oh
not
no, we'll do what we're
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 not
gonna keep
we're not
doing
going to do
it.
that, right? Yeah, you want us to do that, but that's we don't believe that. It's not what we're going to do. And so they switched out the last two mysteries of the Rosary to the Assumption of Our Lady into heaven and her crowning as Queen of Heaven and Earth. That's a really old title, Queen of Heaven. That goes all the way back to Inanna, right? That goes back to Sumerian myth and religion. And so they reverted back to this much older pagan tradition of the Great Mother, seen as an embodiment of the cycles and the great circles of plant and animal life that are constantly,
Yeah.
swallowing their own tail and keeping life
Yeah.
on
But if
planet
you
Earth.
do that, if you do those things, but not under the roof of my house, you are a witch or a sinner. But if you do
Yeah.
those things under the roof of my house, then you are glorious.
But the great thing was that the priest lost, and the popular vision of what the rosary should be was preserved.
Yeah.
Our daughter Sophie, she says that the rosary was a gift from Our Lady, smuggled down through the centuries in the hull of the Catholic Church, like
Yeah.
smuggled down, like right under the nose of the priests and popes. And of
There's
course,
so much of Our Lady smuggled down in the
yeah,
Catholic Church
it's
because
been preserved inside the rosary, like it's all still there if you know
Yeah.
what you're
gosh,
looking
my
at.
cross just fell off.
There you go.
Right when you said that. That's
There you
okay.
go.
It just
All
dropped on the
right.
ground. Like,
Well,
wow.
maybe you'll put a little goddess figure on it.
Yeah, I need to do something else. They didn't have any with a goddess figure at the San Luis Obispo mission.
You have to make your own.
Yeah. Well, the other woman does there, another woman in the Magdalene Collective has it with a beautiful like conch shell, which I love because
Uh-huh.
that
Yeah.
also represents the 108 and the Fibonacci scale and the divine geometry of the Mother Earth. So that's the other thing that's so interesting, right? Is that it does really represent the divine geometry that is here on Mother Earth for us in another way. So
I feel like there's so much more, like the battle between the Roman Catholic Church and the stories that they put out, because it's like the Bible, so everyone's like, this is literally the only story, but there's so much more out there to prove that wrong, but yet we still, people are still like, nope, it's the Bible, it's got to be right, it's the
But
Bible.
Sandy, what's really, really interesting is it's not just that there's so much out there that challenges that narrative.
Mhm.
There's so much in there. Like
Yeah.
if you look in the Bible,
Hmm.
you find it's like a one of those walls, that gets painted over and then the paint starts to flake and you go, wait a minute, somebody
Yeah.
painted something underneath this, right?
Right, it's
Like
being
the
reinterpreted.
right, like the earliest part of Genesis, like the very beginning of the Bible, right? You won't find any priest talking about this or any cardinal or bishop or pope. But if you read the opening verses of the Bible where it describes God separating the land and the sea from the sky and dividing the land up and creating, if you read it very closely and then you go and you find an ancient epic called the Enuma Elish, which is a Babylonian epic, you'll find that that episode is a very thinly disguised version of a story whereby Marduk, the grandson of the primordial mother goddess, right, slays her and cuts her body up, butchers her body, and makes the visible world out of her butchered body. So it's a crime scene. It's the
Yeah.
scene of a crime. So
Yeah.
that what the Judeo-Christian tradition takes as its creation narrative, it actually is about the murder of the divine feminine. And
Mm.
it's right there in front, before the eye. And if you know what you're looking at, it's impossible to look away from it or to unknow it.
Yeah.
Go and you read the Enuma Elish and you read the opening parts of the Bible and you go, oh my God, there it is. This
Hmm.
is the primal murder right there.
yeah.
But it's disguised
Unbelievable.
as an act of creation. Creation out of what? Well, the theologians will say ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Yeah.
But in fact, how could that be? It's created out of the body of the world, the body of the mother, the great mother, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Really is.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. Okay, I have another circle question for us. Boom, 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 boom. Circle question. Where, how would your life, if you could reflect back, how would you be different or have walked different through the world if you had thought that God was a woman? Or if you had thought God could even be a they?
Hmm.
God was not a man. If it how would that have changed your world if God had been something other than a man in your eyes? So let's do 2 minutes. Who wants to go first?
Ooh, I'll go. I'll
Okay.
go. Okay. If I didn't identify God as a man, which I don't really think that I do, I think God is sort of a loose term. I don't think God is, somebody up there. Um, I think that if God was a woman, I would lead my life with so much more confidence. I think, it really makes you feel as a woman less than just because, well, Adam and Eve, I mean, that story has really done a number on women just to begin with, where we're already born sinners before we've done anything wrong. And then you have the Catholic Church that supports that because we need to be baptized immediately upon being born because we're sinners before we come in the world. But yes, I think I would have led my life from a very different perspective. I think I would have been a goddess. That's what I would have been. I'm complete.
Okay. Do you want to go next, Clark? Or
Sure, I'm happy to. It's a really interesting question. I think that if I had been born into a world where either God was a woman or God was, you said a they, like meaning maybe both or neither necessarily. I think if I'd have been born into that world, my father, my adoptive father, my mother remarried when I was 4, my stepfather would have had a great deal less power in the family, in the community, and in the world. And my father, I think, suffered from having too much power. And I suffered definitely from his having too much power. My mother suffered, my siblings suffered. And it wasn't good for him, it wasn't good for anyone. And so I think there would have been perhaps a greater sort of openness and more sort of like free, empty space within which to explore, to express one's feelings, to have feelings, for conversation, for love, for imagination, for many good things, maybe even for prayer. Because I think that when the world disguised as ascending levels of patriarchal authority and power uh, isn't telling us what to desire, what to pray for, what to do, what to believe. We naturally sort of find ourselves approaching the question, well, what do I yearn for? What do I believe? Who am I? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to love? Uh, what is my heart's desire? These kinds of questions have some space to breathe. I think, the God is a man and shut the hell up and do what you're told, way of approaching the world is really designed to suppress all those kinds of yearnings.
Yeah.
yeah. I I think I think I wouldn't have searched for a place in the world so much. Like I think a lot of not feeling like I had any access to divinity as a woman being born to a like not in a family that was a church going family, that divinity was not available. It was nothing that was. And so I never resonated with priestess because I thought it was a negative term, even though I knew inside I was a witch. I never understood goddess or god. Like I was saying to Sandy earlier, like goddess was mythical. Goddess was mythical. There's no such real thing. So like a woman in power always was a myth. It was a myth. The idea that I could have walked through this world thinking that a goddess was real. Like it makes me, I'm not a crier. Circle turned me into a crier. But I am, because that, like, I would have been a different person because I'm a very powerful woman, and that has never been okay. It's never been okay. And if there had been a God figure that was not a mythical God figure, not like, oh, those are the myths, those are the tales, those are the, if there had been something that like, no, this is a representation of what is available to women within themselves to mother in a way that all possibilities are open for everyone, and to mother in a way that we're all here on this earth plane to thrive. If I could have had that, life would have been 100% different. And I know that, like, that's why Mary came to me now to be like, no, let's keep going out there and trying to make women pour that divinity back into themselves, because I think that'll make the world a different place, right? If women stopped hating on themselves because they don't think they're worthy of divinity, that maybe the world would be 50% more divine. So that I'm complete. Thank you.
So I have one last question for you. What would you, if, do you believe that if we could use prayer more, that this would help elevate the feminine in the world and we could possibly move forward and move away from this patriarchal conditioning? How do you see that helping in the future?
Wow, this interview is so fun. Welcome to the portion of the podcast where Sandy and I spill the chalice. And in post production, we come back and discuss what we discussed with our guests and kind of go a little deeper, reflect on it for ourselves. In the second half of this podcast with Clark Strand, we get to talk about the boy drawer.
What is a boy drawer? What I want to know what's in the boy drawer.
Hammers, nails, duct tape,
What do you put in a boy drawer?
bungee cord. What would you put if you could put together a girl drawer? What would you have in there? Crayons, glitter, glue, stones, feathers.
I mean, I think it's funny that that in his family there was a boy drawer. I don't know. My family was majority women. We were all women, really. I think out of all the cousins, I think 13, 14 of us, and there were only two boys.
Okay, yeah, wow.
So we didn't really have boy drawers, and I think the boy cousins just either played with the toys that were girl toys, or they just teased us and did something else. But yeah, we didn't have boy drawers around.
It's so indicative of the times, right? Like, were you allowed to play with Barbie, Sandy?
Yeah.
See, like, I had a feminist mother.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not allowed to play with Barbie. So I think I had a boy drawer.
Oh, really?
I kind of think I had a boy drawer because I had like things for making stuff. And when I was a girl, my mom would give me old electronics, like, and I was allowed to take them apart.
Oh, wow.
So like that was like, if like I got more discards, I think, like I was very, very poor as a girl. Well, I was both. I was both things because my mom was very, very poor. And so my mom would give me discards. Like I never went to an actual store to buy clothes other than a Kmart, like junior high.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go there. My mom used to make my clothes, and I still have a visual of how ridiculous I looked. I looked like a clown in some of
But
the
so
things
that's the
she
thing.
made.
Like, I know people were teaching me how to sew. People were teaching me like how to cook. And in some ways, like the girl drawer is the kitchen cabinet. The girl drawer is the pantry or, and in some ways having that is what perpetuates us thinking that we are in servitude to all.
I think in my grandma's house, well, see, in my household, I was the only child, so everything was my drawer. But at my grandma's house, we had her makeup. She had like this big thing of lipsticks, and oh my God, they must have been so old. It was unbelievable. But we used to take the lipsticks out. It was you just felt decadent trying on all the lipsticks and everything, and her nail polishes. Yeah, she was obsessed with beauty, my grandma, for sure. We used to do our nails and makeup all the time.
Isn't what you just said just really struck me, because it's almost like the feminine intuition to desire beauty is part of what makes us so easily manipulated. In some ways, because we want to make the world beautiful. We want to fix what's broken for you. We do want to mend your socks. We do want to feed you well. We do want to nourish you completely. And because we have that desire, we do want to show up pretty. We do want to be wanted. We do want to be desired. We want to be loved. We love love. We want to live in love, that it makes us so easily manipulated, so easy to keep in this box of I want to say confirmation, which is interesting that God,
Yeah.
right? The box of conformity.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, the other thing we wanted to talk about was language and interpretation, which is right there, the box of conformity, confirmation. What is confirmation? I was not raised Catholic.
So, I made my confirmation, but I'm not sure I can completely describe it, but I'm gonna give it a shot. So, you're baptized first, and your godparents, who are chosen for you, because you can't speak, they speak for you, saying that, I reject the devil and I'll follow Jesus and blah, 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 blah. So that's your godparents. And then you make your communion when it's like second grade, so I don't know what age that is, but at that point in time, you're able to speak for yourself and you take the host for the first time, so you're receiving the body and blood of Christ. And then for whatever reason, there is confirmation, which is when you're like a teenager, and I know all of my friends who were Jewish were doing their bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs at that time. So I'm not sure like how it aligns with that, but it's basically a reconfirmation that everything that has been said before.
Like
So
now that you've grown up, you confirm you still agree with these.
yes, and I recall being like, in order to get to do your communion and your confirmation in that time frame, so it's like from 6 to 13, you have to go to catechism, or at least in where I lived. I don't know, maybe other places they have Sunday school or whatever. And it was absolutely torturous. I hated it. I thought I was going to die every single time I had to go. And I begged and begged my mom, that I don't want to make my confirmation. It's unimportant. I don't need this. And she said, but you'll never be able to get married in a church. And it's actually true. You cannot get married in a Catholic church if you weren't baptized, communion, and confirmed.
If you're not living in the box of confirmation.
And then what they will tell you is that you are not, like, if you get married, like later on. So I was a wedding photographer for a period of time, and a lot of the weddings that I did, people were getting married at the venue, and it's so much prettier, and your guests don't have to drive all this way. And I remember I remember hearing, though, if you don't get married in a church, you're technically not married in the eyes of God. And I was like, that's ridiculous. God can see you whether you're in a church or a venue or a field or a mountaintop or whatever.
Whatever. It's kind of interesting because my mom was raised Catholic. I was not raised Catholic, but when we were very poor, as I said, and part of my childhood, later grade school, we backpacked through Europe. And we must have been so poor that we actually lived at the Catholic Church. I lived over the cistern at a cathedral, an ancient church in Ibiza, Spain.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, kind of cool. And also the priest there only spoke Latin. And he baptized me and gave me communion in Latin as a girl around 7 or 8. And my mom lost her noodles because this man was, I'm sure he was trying to save me from what he perceived was our life that was going to take me down this thing. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought he was super nice. He brought me into the big old fancy room. Like I was never allowed in there because you had to be dressed a certain way and we didn't have those clothes. And he let me come in and he did the whole thing in some other language. It all seems so real to me, surreal. And I have actually in Latin in Ibiza, Spain, had this priest man save me, but that's my only Catholic. And I did date a Catholic boy out of high school and went to quite a few, but I don't really know much of the Catholic religion at all.
Isn't it crazy though that we're so conditioned, we're told like the control that they have over us, we don't even realize that we go through life and we're like, no, you have to do this thing. But it kind of goes all the way back to those earlier times when it was like Constantine said, like, everyone, you have to be Catholic if you don't agree with this, it's heresy and you'll be put to death. So
Yeah.
basically, now we have the same thing. We're not put to death, but you won't be able to get married in a church. If you get divorced, you're never allowed in the church again. And when you die, you cannot get last rites. So it's like
Right.
they are holding you hostage. If you are a believer, they are holding you hostage, basically. You
With
have
their
to
language.
follow
And
them.
even I think Clark mentioned throughout this whole podcast that as a Buddhist monk, he was like also like it was a very much a patriarchal, I'm on top, these are the rules that we follow, and that you don't have any autonomy. And then when you break these rules, you're not like, and that the rules can get brushed under the rug if you are one of those chosen males in those positions, but everybody else's um, discretions
Yeah.
are punished. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
interesting. It's an interesting concept. Well, we probably should get back to the podcast and back to listening to Clark Strand. Um, I love his perspective. I love his perspective. Let's get back to it.
Okay. So I have one last question for you. What would you, if, do you believe that if we could use prayer more, that this would help elevate the feminine in the world and we could possibly move forward and move away from this patriarchal conditioning? How do you see that helping in the future?
Well, that's an interesting question. Our Lady of Woodstock has been speaking and giving messages basically for now, I think, almost 14 years and at least 13 years. And one of the very earliest messages that she gave is also her longest, called The Gospel According to the Dark. And the first book in the Way of the Roads trilogy, Waking Up to the Dark, ends with that gospel. It's 3 pages long, 8 paragraphs. And really, the whole book is just the world's longest introduction to the world's shortest book. It's really just meant to set that up, her words. And that message is really, if I had to sum it up, like in a single phrase, I would say that, it is her message of ecological sobriety. Like it is a eye-opening document. It is sobering. It is by turns the most comforting and the most terrifying thing you've ever read. That's the way I would describe it.
Mhm.
That it is the most frightening and at the same time the most comforting thing you've ever read. And every time I read it, um, I come away feeling the same thing, which is that we are likely to experience, almost certain to experience, widespread and near total collapse as a species before we can dust ourselves off and begin to live in a saner way again.
Mm.
And that the dissolution of the way that we live now is, when I joked, or when Perdita joked that I spent 20 years trying to get patriarchy right, the instinct to get patriarchy right, like the instinct to try to take our existing system and by correcting it or making it more feminine or doing this or that to it or reforming it is going to work, I think is a delusion. I don't think there's any reforming the way we live. I think it's going to have to disappear, and I think it
Right.
will disappear.
We're at the winter.
Yeah,
We're
we
at the
are.
winter.
We
And
are, and we can experience a rebirth. It's part of the natural cycle, and
yeah,
Our Lady will guide us through it. I definitely believe that.
I do too. And Clark, it always kind of shivers me to my timbers. It shiver me timbers because I I was raised off the land,
Yeah.
and I often have felt like I was given these skills the skills of all the path I've walked, because I can actually be a part of starting over. Like I
Yeah.
actually know how. And it is it gives me goosebumps all over my body to say it out loud, but it has felt like it's a part of the path that I'm walking, that I actually can be right out in nature and help you find water and help us find water and tell you what plants we can eat and not eat and how we can process this or that, whether I know it or not, because and I can talk to the animals, right? Because I was out there amongst them for so long on the Lost Coast. I grew up in the Lost Coast of California. I know you're familiar
Ah,
with the
wonderful.
area. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I know that part.
yeah, well, maybe you've been. I grew up in this little itty bitty town for part. I grew up a lot of places, but for part of my life, I grew up in this itty bitty town called Petrolia, California, which is 50 or like an hour south of Ferndale on the Lost Coast. So an hour to a grocery store. Like when
Wow.
I tell people I lived in remote, it was like an hour to a grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very
Well,
remote.
we'll stick with you, Carrie. If anything
Stick with
starts to
me,
happen,
people.
Clark
Yeah.
and I will pack up and we'll
Yeah.
follow you.
But I think it's interesting because, like you said, it's true. Like you can actually take a lot of solace in the fact that these are the cycles, and that under these temples that people have been worshiping are the temples that people worshipped before the time before
Right,
we got to this place,
right.
our timeline, and that we do continue on. And maybe with the next continuance, there will be a unity this
Yeah,
time. There will be a unity where we love thy neighbor, like we love thy tree, like we love thy dog, like we love the woman and the man, and that maybe it does have to all fall apart to come up
yeah.
to the soil again. And it is a place that does bring you comfort, and also it's sort of scary when you see these other people like it's the second coming and they're like pushing it forward.
Well, for some people, the vision of apocalypse or disorder, is like their golden opportunity. That's what they really yearn for. They yearn for not, they don't yearn for starting over after collapse. They yearn for the collapse
For the
Mm,
collapse.
and for the redistribution of power, because it's always temporary. No,
Yeah.
nobody can game collapse.
Yeah,
yeah.
and the hard part is there's no divine feminine that when it all collapses is going to be like, I'm on top, right? That's just not what divine feminine really does. So,
There's
well,
no future golden age,
no,
I don't think.
good. No. Yeah.
But there is a future. I do
So
believe there's
I do believe there's a bright future. The earth is gonna Gaia mama, she's gonna keep going and she's gonna be just
been
fine.
around for a long time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you ever ask for the lady to come to you, or do you just wait for her to come to you? Do you prepare yourself for her coming? Do you take
Well,
action?
I can't prepare, and so there's really nothing I can do. I don't really, people will say, occasionally I'll be on a podcast or be, asked to, I don't know, give a talk somewhere, and someone will introduce me and say, here's Clark Strand, he channels the Virgin Mary, and I always start by saying, well, actually, no, I don't, because that implies some degree of skill or agency, or, like a channel is contained.
Mhm.
It's like a channel is like, it has walls, right? It has a trough, it has walls, it's like a tube or a tunnel or whatever. And I don't experience any of that. It's all her.
Right.
And she says, what she has to say and the way she has to say it. And I really have no idea how it happens or how it's done or any control over it. Uh, so yeah, there's nothing I can do to prepare. I don't remember very much afterwards. Perdita writes it all down. And then she sends me the transcript. And then I remember word for word what was said. But until I look at the transcript, it's like a dream I had that I've forgotten. And I couldn't
Yeah.
tell you anything that was said. And then I
I
look at it and it comes back word for word and I can correct anything that's not that's not right. But until I see it on the page, I have no memory of it. So I'm not even really there for it.
Well,
Right. 'Cause
that's
it's not,
wonderful that you have her there to document it for you.
Well,
yeah.
you need somebody like that. So you always need somebody like that. And the if you look at the history of apparitions, there's always one there to remember to write it down.
There's
And
a
that
scribe. You
that's
need a
that's a
scribe.
that's a really specialized job, it turns out. There's not much there's not much skill involved in doing what I do. There's a tremendous amount of skill in doing what Perdita does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting because being a woman, like I have tried to hone those psychic skills, and I did find them it kind of exhausting. Like when people like answer this for me, and I have to open up this channel and try to get some answer, it
Well,
comes like I taste peanuts, right? Like it doesn't
right,
come
right.
through where sometimes it comes through like a big message, but and I
Well,
understand you don't hold
psychics,
it.
yeah, psychism is really real. I mean, we know a lot of psychics, and we have psychics, very powerful psychics among our closest friends, including the one that Perdita co-wrote her first book with, The Reluctant Psychic, and so that is very real. But it's not what I do.
Yeah, and your book reminds me of the book where Many Minds, Many Masters. Have you read that book?
No,
And it's a psychologist who is working with a woman who, like you, just like spurts some knowledge or knowing out to him, and he starts to document it. And he is afraid to like even speak about what he's documenting because he's like, she's clearly speaking with an ascended master. Like,
yeah, yeah,
yet here, because she's a woman and she's having voices in her head, she's
yeah.
on my couch like she's crazy. And
Hey,
that like you getting these visions is acceptable because you are a Buddhist monk and you are a man, and that like that gave you a certain amount of privilege to even have the strength to share, right? You talk about even how hard it was for you to share from this
yeah.
position of almost where society will accept it from you.
Well, yeah, it was not. It was not an easy thing to do. I asked Our Lady early on. I didn't have any idea what was happening, and at a certain point, it was clear that the uh, the closest I could come to describing for people who she was to say she was the Virgin Mary, and so and she certainly seemed to play by those rules. So. But I wasn't sure what was expected of me. Like, I had never been particularly interested in apparitions. I didn't know anything about them, but after the apparition started, I had to feel like I had to come up to speed. So I read a number of books about Marian apparitions. I read about Bernadette of Lourdes and about the Fatima apparitions and Medjugorje and Our Lady of Cabejo and all of these stories, and they all go to the bishop, right?
Hmm.
Because they're all Catholic, right? So I was sort of frightened that I was going to have to go like to the bishop or something. And so I asked Our Lady early on. I said, "Am I supposed to go to the bishop?" I wouldn't know how to do that. I'm not Catholic. No desire to be Catholic. I spent so many years as a journalist, basically outing, pedophiles and this or that religion and stuff like that. You know, I've been in the room with a lot of very powerful spiritual people, but it was mostly because I knew that they were criminals and
Yeah.
I was gathering information. So I'm not a person whose pulse quickens around, a powerful spiritual person because I don't really I
Hmm.
don't really take them that seriously.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with a bishop. Would I go to a bishop and tell him a story when I don't give a damn whether he believes it or not? Because I don't respect whether he believes it or not. Doesn't mean anything to me. What would that even look like? I had no idea. So I asked her, and she said, "No, the editors are the bishops now. I want you to write a book."
Oh,
And that, I mean, you'd think I'd be relieved. right? Because so I'd have to go to the bishop. But then I had to go to the editor, and it turned out I did have a bishop. The editors are my bishops. It have been for a long time, right? I'm a professional writer, and I've been writing books on spiritual themes for. By that point, had already been doing it for most of my career, and so suddenly I realized I was going to have to do exactly what those young peasant girls did, and it was going to be just as frightening for me, and just as risky as what they did, but in a different context. Because I had to go to my bishops and say, this happened, and risk them mocking me or not believing me or whatever.
Yeah.
And so Waking Up to the Dark got published because I finished it and I sent it to my agent. My agent said, there's no way I can publish this. I mean, I can sell it. And Our Lady had already told me that she had already chosen an editor for the book who would publish it quickly without revisions,
Hmm.
which is unheard of in the publishing industry. To publish something quickly, like under a year, and to publish something without any editing is virtually unheard of. It doesn't happen. So Our Lady had told me this would happen. So I said to my agent, well, what if I sell it? Will you handle the deal? And she says, will I catch the baby? Sure. I mean, I've known her for a long time, and she said, sure, I'll do that. But she was raised by an FBI profiler, observant Catholic who went to mass every morning on his way to the FBI to work. And so she had very negative associations from her upbringing with Catholicism. She didn't want to book with the Virgin Mary, even if most of it was about sleep science and paleo history and stuff like that. Even the first part of the book was very science based. She didn't want anything to do with it.
And Virgin Mary, she brings up something, right? Because if you're not Catholic, you're like, I have no interest. And if you're
Yeah,
like,
right.
you're
So
like, don't tell
I
me
was
anything negative.
very, very, in a very strange place. So I went, after I got off the phone with her and I pulled out a list of the 20 top spiritual book editors in America, many of whom I knew and had known for years. And I had no idea which one. I had a good, strong feeling, knowing the way Our Lady works, that the editor was on that list, but I had no idea which one it was. So I had to write all of them. I wrote them all the same email. I went past my agent. I attached the actual manuscript of the finished book. And I wrote to them and I said, Our Lady has said that one of you will be the editor for this book and will publish it quickly without revision.
Wow.
And she says that you will know who you are. So this was professional suicide, basically. Perdita was panicked beyond belief that I had just destroyed my career and my credibility forever. And but lo and behold, the most famous of all 20 editors, the absolute most famous, most powerful woman in publishing, called me up and said she wanted to have lunch with me. And the moment we sat down at over lunch in New York City, she said, "I'm the one."
Wow,
Yeah.
that was
Well,
powerful.
I love
So go
that.
figure, you can't make this stuff up. But
No, you can't.
I've learned not to second guess her. If
Yeah.
she says something will happen, it will happen. I don't have to, I mean, it's nerve wracking. It's nail biting sometimes, but I just, I only work here, so I just do what I'm told.
I feel that so strongly because I feel that about the way I found your book, the way I listened to your book, and I'm always like, what's in store? What's in store for Clark and I and Perdita and Sandy in the future and women? Because why was I so clearly guided to this moment in time here? And so I'm excited to see what happens for Our Lady, for Mary Magdalene, and for the divine feminine in the future, and how we are all emissaries for it.
Have you read our daughter's book, The Madonna Secret?
I
I'm
have
not.
I have it in my list.
I have to look
We'll
up.
put it up there. And And I would love, just talking to you, I'm like, oh, next time we need to have you and Perdita together, maybe for the Magdalene Summit 2025. We're working on that as well. So
Okay, wonderful.
it's been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. It was a blessing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for more with our wonderful guest and something about Mary's.
And I am the word that has been buried underground, the one the world has lost, and that soon will be found. And I am the hidden face of the moon, the untamed, in which the stars have elected the womb. And I will come back soon in the shape of a golden ring. Mary once again, the prince of the mighty king. And this day the world will drench in grace, when man and woman unite in one embrace. Follow the trace that I have left inside your heart. Christ is the aim. Know that I am the dart. Follow my light in the midst of the dark. For Jesus and I, we are the candle and the spark. Yes, Jesus and I, we are the candle